Business costs. We're going to take a look in this presentation at the different costs that business organisations have. This could be useful for your A-level, your BTEC, or maybe even your GCSE. Let's start by looking at the two different types of costs that exist in an organisation. In a business, we can categorise our costs in two ways. We have start-up costs and we have operating costs. Start-up costs are the costs you have when setting up your business. So for example, they typically are one-off costs such as like painting, decorating, equipment for the shop or the factory, fixtures and fittings, all those one-off things, so like buying a till or buying a computer for a one-off. Whereas your operating costs are your day-to-day costs. They're the costs you have on an ongoing basis. So for example, buying new stock to sell in your shop, paying the wages of your employees, paying salaries, paying rent, paying your utilities bills, that's your electric, your gas, your water, or paying your broadband costs. So they're the ongoing costs. So let's look into more detail at the different types of costs that we've got. So within our operating costs we have fixed costs. Now these are costs that do not change with output. That's the key word, they do not change with output. For example, these costs will remain the same if you sell no items or you sell 10,000 items. A business has to pay rent on their building each month, regardless of if any customers actually use their business. That is a good example of a fixed cost. You still have to pay your rent even if nobody uses your business. Other examples of fixed costs are things like broadband. You still pay for your broadband regardless if you use it at all. Hopefully the more that you use it, theoretically the cheaper it gets in the cost per unit because you're going to use it more. But you don't need to worry about that at this level. So your fixed costs stay the same. The other type of cost you've got are variable costs. Now these costs do change with output. These are costs that change regardless of how many items you sell. For example, if you sell more items, then the costs are going to increase as a result. Let's look at an example. If it costs 20p to buy each can of cola from my supplier, and then I sell more cans of cola, I'm going to have to spend more money to buy those cans of cola. So let's think about buying 10 cans. 10 cans will then cost me £2 to buy those cans. Where if I only sell one can, it's only going to be one can, which is 20p. So you can see straight away, these are costs that depend on the output, the number of sales we make. And that's really important to remember. So let's see if you can categorise some costs. So with the costs on the screen now, try and group them into fixed and variable costs. So you've got rent, you've got salary, utilities, broadband, wages, stock, water, mobile phone, insurance and electric. Try and group them into fixed and variable costs. You may want to pause the video while you do this, and we'll have a look at the answer now. So hopefully, as you can see there, you've got your fixed costs in red, and you've got your variable costs in blue. Rent is a fixed cost, it doesn't change with output, as you know. Salaries, they are fixed, you have to pay them for the year, so it doesn't matter how many hours somebody works, you still pay them the same amount of money, so you might get £30,000 per year salary. Your broadband is fixed, you still have to pay your broadband even if you don't use it, it's a fixed cost. Your insurance is a fixed cost, you still have to pay it every year regardless if you use it. Whereas your wages, for example, they're variable because you pay them by the hour, so the more hours somebody works, the more it costs. Stock, variable cost. The more items you buy in, the more it's going to cost you. Water, if you're on a meter, for example, the more water you use, the more it costs. Of course, water could be a fixed cost if you pay a standing charge, so you pay the same amount of money for the year use of water, but assuming you're on a meter, it's going to be a variable cost. Electric will be a variable cost, assuming again it's on a meter, which it tends to be. I've not seen many deals where you get a fixed amount of electric, so the more electric you use, the more it's going to cost you. And utilities, which could be your gas, your electric, your water, so that's a fancy term for all those put together, they tend to be variable costs. Your mobile phone I put into a different colour there because it's a bit of a tricky one. It all depends on your contract. If you have a fixed contract where you pay a set amount, you get unlimited use, then it's a fixed cost. However, if you have a contract where it's pay as you go, it's very much a variable cost because the more you use it, the more you pay. And you may have one where it's what's called semi-variable, where it's in the middle of the two. You pay an element of fixed, but also an element of variable. And let's look at a contract like that. So you might pay £10 a month for a certain amount of minutes, text and internet. But once you use those, then you start going into the variable cost side, because then the more you use it, the more you pay. So that's when we have this thing called semi-variable costs. and they're slightly different again. Now within the cost idea we have these things, direct and indirect costs. Now this is a different way of categorizing costs. We can get our costs and categorize them by being direct or indirect. Now the best way to look at this is to use an example like the ice cream man who's going to sell ice lollies in my example. So direct costs are costs directly related to the production process, like for example selling more ice creams. So they are directly linked to actually sales or production in this case. So the more ice creams I sell, the more money I make. They're direct costs. Where indirect costs are not directly linked to the production or the sales process. So for example, that would be like my ice cream van, because it's not directly linked to how many items I sell. Once I pay my rent on my ice cream van, that is it, I pay my rent. Obviously then it's being paid for hopefully by selling more ice lollies, which of course then are a direct cost. You also have this thing called total costs. Now total cost is quite simply calculated by adding your fixed costs to your variable costs. And the formula you need to learn to calculate this is total costs equals fixed costs plus variable costs. So if you look at the example down below, you've got to first try and identify which costs are fixed and which costs are variable. And then you use the calculation. So thinking about rent, you think rent's going to be a fixed cost hopefully. Stock, you're hopefully thinking it's a variable cost. Salary, you hopefully worked out it's a fixed cost. Wages, you've hopefully worked out it's a variable cost. Your utilities, you've worked out hopefully it's a variable cost. And your broadband, you've hopefully worked out it's a fixed cost. If you total those figures, you'll get 3,330 in total fixed costs, and you would then add those on to your variable cost, which would be 2,500, which will give you a total cost of £5,830. And there you are, you've calculated your costs. Okay, that's it. You should now understand the different costs involved with businesses and be able to identify the different types of costs that exist. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, it's at BeeBusinessBee, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Remember, you can tweet me any areas of business in the future you want me to cover, and visit my website, it's beebusinessbee.co.uk.